The Midnight Flag Salute. This story comes from Sarah, a young, passionate history teacher. A few years ago, right after graduating college, Sarah joined Teach for America. Instead of picking a safe city school, she applied to teach at a newly built elementary school deep in the remote, rugged Ozark Mountains of Missouri. The area was beautiful but isolating. Endless rolling hills, dense forests, and deep hollows that fogged over every night. The school was built to serve the children of poor families living scattered in those hills, a community often forgotten by the rest of the world. The first trip up to the school was a nightmare. The group of 10 teachers piled into an old van, struggling for hours on muddy, washed-out mountain trails. When they arrived, the school looked like a strange oasis in the wilderness. It was modern, built in a U shape, painted stark white. Since it was miles from the nearest town, the teachers had to live in a dormitory wing right behind the classrooms. On her first night, Sarah felt something was wrong. The air in the hollow was heavy and thick. Even with the doors locked tight, she could hear the wind whistling through the cracks. It didn't sound like wind, it sounded like human weeping. The trouble started in the very first week. Because the school was new, they hadn't finished the perimeter fence. Behind the school was an overgrown lot leading into the deep woods. During a walk, Sarah, with her historian's instinct, found something strange. Hidden behind the tall weeds was an abandoned cemetery. There were about 20 graves with cracked, mossy headstones. When Sarah cleared the moss, she chilled. The names weren't standard military style. Beside the names were crude, strange symbols. After digging through local records in the small-town library nearby, Sarah turned pale. These weren't graves of civilians or regular soldiers. This was the burial ground of a group of bushwhackers, brutal, lawless Confederate guerrillas who terrorized Missouri during the Civil War. They were notorious for ambushing Union troops, looting, and slaughtering civilians in these very mountains. Sarah warned the other teachers, but the local kids didn't know fear. During recess, a group of first graders, led by a rowdy boy named Billy, snuck out back. They turned the graveyard into a playground. They played leapfrog over the tombstones. Even worse, to prove his bravery, Billy pulled down his pants and urinated right on the biggest grave in the center. The consequences were immediate. The next morning, the classroom was empty. All 7 kids who played in the graveyard were absent. Sarah and a colleague drove to their houses to check on them. When they entered Billy's house, Sarah almost passed out from the smell of sickness and menthol rub. Billy was in bed, burning with a fever, delirious. But what terrified Sarah was his body. On his arms, legs, and back were black and blue bruises. They weren't from falling. They were clearly shaped like large human hands, rough, broad hands that had grabbed the boy. And worst of all, Billy's private parts were swollen, angry red and incredibly painful, making him scream every time he woke up. Billy's parents, superstitious mountain folk, trembled as they told Sarah he's being punished by the unseen. Last night he was screaming that men in gray rags with dirty beards were surrounding his bed, beating him. They told him he pissed on their dinner table. The incident shook the school. The teachers rushed to buy candles and flowers, went to the graves to apologize, and immediately fenced off the area. But the ghosts of the bushwhackers weren't the only things on that land. Something else, something more painful and filled with righteous rage, was hiding right inside the school building. About 2 weeks after Billy's incident, another terrifying event happened in the girls' restroom. There was an older teacher named Mrs. Baker, known for being strict and skeptical of ghosts. One day during class, a little girl asked to use the bathroom. Mrs. Baker was annoyed but let her go. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The girl didn't come back. Suddenly, a scream echoed from the hall. The girl ran back into the classroom, face pale as a sheet, her pants soaked in urine. She was sobbing, stammering, "Teacher, there's a crazy lady. A crazy lady in the bathroom. She chased me out. She said she'd kill me." Mrs. Baker was furious, thinking an intruder was scaring the students. She grabbed a heavy wooden ruler and marched to the bathroom at the end of the hall. When she stepped in, the air was freezing cold, much colder than outside, and it smelled terrible. The smell of rust, old blood, and rotting meat. Mrs. Baker yelled, "Who's in here? Come out!" Silence. She checked the stalls. Stall 1, empty. Stall 2, empty. The last stall door was closed. She reached out to push it open. Bang! 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 Something slammed against the door from the inside, so hard the frame shook and plaster dust fell from the ceiling. Accompanying the banging was a heart-wrenching scream, a woman's voice, raspy with agony. "Get out! Get out! You hounds! I won't talk! I'd rather die than talk!" Mrs. Baker's heart stopped. The voice sounded ancient, filled with hate. But being the tough woman she was, she thought someone was hurt. She summoned her courage and kicked the door open. The door flew back. The sight inside made her collapse to the floor. There was no one standing there, but hovering in midair, right above the toilet, was a woman. She was wearing a long, tattered dress from the 1860s, soaked in fresh blood. Her arms were stretched up, hanging from the ceiling by invisible chains. Her wrists were mangled, blood dripping down her pale arms. Her head hung low, messy hair covering her face. Her body was covered in lash marks and open wounds. As Mrs. Baker gaped in horror, the woman slowly lifted her head. Her eyes had no pupils, just deep, empty sockets burning with hatred. She looked straight at Mrs. Baker, bared her blood-stained teeth, and hissed, "You can kill me, but I will haunt you forever." Then she jerked against the invisible chains, launching her bloody body toward Mrs. Baker. The old teacher screamed, scrambled backward, fell into the hallway, and passed out. When the other teachers arrived, the bathroom was empty, but the smell of metallic blood and burnt flesh still lingered. Sarah, piecing it together, found the horrifying truth in old local records. The land where the school stood, over 150 years ago, was a hideout for those bushwhackers. That woman was a local woman who acted as a spy, or nurse, for the Union Army. She had been captured and imprisoned right where the bathroom now stood. They had hung her up, tortured her for days to get information on Union troop movements, and finally violated her to death. Her spirit was trapped in that moment of agony. She didn't know the war was over. She saw anyone who entered, student or teacher, as her torturers coming back for more. The teachers decided they had to do something. That afternoon, they bought white flowers and scented candles, holding a quiet prayer service right at the bathroom door, telling her the war was over, the Union had won, and she was safe. It seemed like the place was just full of pain and fear, but the final event brought a completely different emotion. Since the school was new, the flagpole system wasn't finished. For the first 3 weeks, the pole stood bare in the courtyard. By the 4th week, the pulley system was finally fixed. Everyone was excited for Monday morning to raise the flag for the first time. Saturday night, the teachers had a small celebration. Around 2 a.m., when everyone had gone to bed, Emily, a young teacher rooming with Sarah, couldn't sleep. She heard a strange sound coming from the courtyard. Squeak, 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 the sound of rusty metal rubbing, the sound of a pulley turning. Emily shook Sarah awake. "Do you hear that? Who's messing with the flagpole at this hour?" The two girls tiptoed to the hallway window, looking down at the moonlit courtyard. The scene took their breath away, not from fear, but from awe. The American flag was slowly rising up the pole. The rope was moving on its own. No one was standing at the base. The flag reached the top, unfurling and snapping in the night wind. And then, from the shadows at the base of the pole, a faint figure stepped out. It was the woman, the ghost from the bathroom. But she was no longer a bloody, tattered corpse hanging in chains. Under the moonlight, she was wearing a clean dress, standing tall. Her face was no longer in pain. It radiated peace and pride. She stood at attention, back straight, looking up at the flag flying high. Then, slowly and solemnly, she placed her right hand over her heart. In the wind rushing through the Ozark Valley, Sarah and Emily swore they heard a voice, clear and resounding, echoing from another world. Freedom, glory. The Union is preserved. She wasn't trapped in the dark cell anymore. When she saw the flag go up, She realized the war was finally over. Her side had won. Her sacrifice wasn't in vain. She was performing her own victory ceremony right on the ground where she had fallen. The next morning, without saying a word to each other, the teachers woke up early before the students arrived. They set up flowers and candles right at the base of the flagpole. They held an impromptu memorial service under the flying flag. As they stood there, everyone felt a presence. It wasn't a cold threat anymore. It felt like protection. Sarah said that after that ceremony, the school became incredibly peaceful. No more banging doors, no more weeping ghosts. At the end of that school year, more than half the teachers, including Sarah, signed up to stay for another 3 years. They felt they weren't just teaching, they were guarding the rest of the souls who had laid down their lives on that land. He was crawling across the road. This story comes from Nick. Today, he's a happily married man, but there was a time in his past when he lived in absolute terror because of an intervention from the other side. Nick is a long-haul trucker hauling construction materials out of Phoenix, Arizona. The man who taught him how to drive, how to handle the hairpin turns on mountain passes, and how to stay awake on those long overnight hauls was his Uncle Ray. Nick respected him like a father. Uncle Ray lived in a small, isolated town deep in the New Mexico desert. He was a tough, quiet man, but he had a big heart. When he fell ill, Nick, no matter how busy he was, made sure to drive his pickup truck hundreds of miles across the desert every 2 weeks to visit him. The shortest route to the town was an old shortcut that wound through desolate canyons and over rusting iron bridges. Other truckers whispered about strange things happening on that road at night, but Nick never paid attention. He just wanted to get home fast. One afternoon, while Nick was on the road, his phone rang. It was his mom. Her voice was choked with tears. Nick, Ray is gone. He passed away this afternoon. The news hit him like a physical blow. Even though he knew it was coming, Nick felt hollowed out. He forced himself to finish his last delivery, returned his rig to the depot, showered quickly, jumped into his personal pickup, and floored it toward New Mexico. He wanted to see his uncle one last time before the viewing began the next morning. The sky turned black. A sudden desert storm hit. Rain poured down in sheets, lightning tearing across the sky. Nick squinted through the windshield. In his grief and confusion, he followed his GPS and accidentally turned onto that old shortcut, the one he swore he'd avoid during storms. The road was empty, no streetlights, just his headlights cutting through the rain. Suddenly, Nick saw something white lying in the middle of the road, right on a narrow iron bridge. He slowed down. A bag of cement? No, it was moving. It was crawling. Nick slammed on the brakes a few yards away. In the headlights, he saw clearly that it was a man. The man was wearing a loose white dress shirt that was soaked through, clinging to his skin. He wasn't standing. He was flat on his stomach, using his elbows and knees to slither across the asphalt, twisting his body weirdly like a giant worm. Jesus, Nick muttered. He thought maybe it was a drunk or a crash victim. He opened his door and ran out into the rain. "Hey, buddy, are you okay?" The man didn't answer. He just kept crawling. Nick ran over and bent down to help him up. When Nick touched him, he recoiled. The man's body was ice cold, stiff as a rock, and unnaturally heavy. Nick had to use all his strength to hoist the man up by his armpits. "Easy now, let's get you to the side," Nick yelled over the rain. He half-dragged the man to the end of the bridge. The man walked strangely, his feet dragging on the pavement like he had no bones in his legs. Once they were across, Nick leaned him against the guardrail. "Where do you live? I can call someone," Nick asked. The man remained silent, his head hanging low, wet hair covering his face. He just stood there, gripping the railing, staring down at the floodwaters raging below. Nick felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He turned back to his truck, planning to start it and call the police, but the truck wouldn't start. He turned the key repeatedly. Click, 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 then silence. Dead battery. He cursed, slamming his hand on the steering wheel. "Damn it! Must be the alternator." He looked in the rearview mirror. The man was still standing there, motionless in the rain. Nick thought, maybe I should ask him if there's a house nearby. He opened the door and stepped out again. "Hey, mister, do you know if..." The words died in Nick's throat. The man was standing with his back to Nick, but his head was slowly turning. It rotated a full, impossible 180 degrees, accompanied by the sickening sound of cracking bone. The face looked at Nick. It wasn't a human face. It was mashed, a ruin of meat and bone, as if it had been crushed by something heavy. Flaps of skin hung loose, revealing white jawbone. One eye was gone, leaving a black empty socket that wept blood into the rain. Nick stood rooted to the spot, his heart hammering. The thing looked at him and smiled, a twisted grin with shattered teeth. Then, it let go of the railing, leaned backward, and fell into the river. Splash! The water swallowed him, then silence. Nick screamed, scrambled back into his truck and locked the doors. He was shaking violently, turning the key in desperation. "Start! Come on, start!" Just then, another truck came around the bend. Its headlights were a savior. The driver, a good Samaritan, stopped and gave Nick a jump start. Nick didn't dare tell him what he saw. He just wanted to get out of there. But the weirdness wasn't over. After the truck started, Nick drove on. About 10 minutes later, his GPS told him to turn left. He turned, and in his headlights was that same rusty iron bridge. He had driven in a circle. Terrified, Nick screamed inside the cab, "Uncle Ray, please, help me find the way. I'm scared." Strangely, right after he pleaded, the GPS screen flickered and rerouted to a different road. Nick drove with his eyes fixed forward, refusing to look in the rearview mirror until he saw the lights of the town. Uncle Ray's funeral was somber. Nick stayed by the casket, whispering to his uncle about the nightmare drive, thanking him for guiding him in. After the funeral, Nick's life spiraled. Between the grief and the stress, he became irritable. He got into a huge fight with Megan, his longtime girlfriend, whom Uncle Ray had adored. In a fit of anger, Nick broke up with her. Uncle Ray had always treated Megan like a daughter. He used to say, "Nick, if you lose that girl, you're a fool. She's the only niece-in-law I'll accept." After the breakup, Nick went off the rails. He started dating random women, partying to numb the pain. A few weeks later, he drove back to New Mexico to visit Uncle Ray's grave and clean out the old house. That afternoon, Nick went to the cemetery. He brought flowers and candles. The air was still. There was no wind. Nick lit a candle. It went out immediately. He lit it again. Out. He cupped his hands around it, lighting it a third time. The flame flared up, then bent violently sideways, as if someone had blown it out hard. Nick looked around. The grass wasn't even moving. "Are you mad at me, Uncle Ray?" he whispered. That night, Nick slept alone in Uncle Ray's empty house. The loneliness was suffocating. He lay on the old couch, where his uncle used to nap, and drifted into a fitful sleep. In his dream, he was standing in the front yard. It was twilight, and a thick fog covered the ground. Through the fog, Nick saw Uncle Ray. He was wearing his favorite flannel shirt, hands on his hips, looking furious. But he wasn't looking at Nick. He was looking at the front gate. Standing there, looming in the shadows, was the smashed face man from the bridge. He was trying to enter the yard, dragging a broken leg, his hollow eye socket fixed on the front door. Uncle Ray roared, his voice like thunder. "You get out of here! Don't you dare touch my nephew! I know who you are! Go back to your damn bridge!" The ghost seemed terrified of Uncle Ray. He hung his mangled head, turned, and dissolved into the mist. Nick ran forward, relieved. "Uncle Ray, you saved me! That guy—" Before he could finish, Uncle Ray spun around. That's when Nick screamed. Uncle Ray's face was decomposing. His skin was purple and swollen, exactly as it had looked in the casket. His eyes were bloodshot red, burning with rage. He wasn't the gentle uncle anymore. He was a furious spirit. He pointed a bony finger right in Nick's face and snarled, "I saved you once, but I won't save you again." You dare leave Megan? You dare run around with those other girls? I told you, she is the only one I accept. If you don't get back with her, I'll let that smashed face thing drag you into the river. Do you hear me? Do you hear me? The scream echoed, shaking the foundation of the dream house. Nick woke up gasping, sitting bolt upright on the couch, drenched in sweat. His heart was pounding out of his chest. The sound of, "Do you hear me?" was still ringing in his ears. He looked at the clock. 3 a.m. He understood everything. The candle didn't go out because of the wind. His uncle was furious because he had broken his promise, because he had abandoned the woman Ray loved like a daughter. Ray had to come back, use all his spiritual strength to chase away the evil ghost, just to slap some sense into him. The next morning, Nick called his parents and told them the dream. His mom said, "He's right. He loved Megan. You better fix this." Nick called Megan. He cried, apologized, and told her everything, from the ghost on the bridge to the dream where his uncle screamed at him. Megan listened, chilled but touched. She knew how much Uncle Ray loved her. She agreed to forgive him. That afternoon, before driving back to Phoenix, Nick went to the grave one last time. "Uncle Ray, I'm sorry. I'm back with Megan. We're going to get married. Please don't be mad." He lit the candle. The flame burst to life, standing tall and bright, burning steadily even as the evening breeze picked up. Nick and Megan eventually got married. Now, every time they visit the grave, they go together. And every time Nick drives past that rusty iron bridge, he feels a deep gratitude, not just for his life, but for the happiness his stubborn, protective uncle preserved for him from the other side. I'll take him with me. This story comes from Holly. She's in her late 30s now, living a comfortable life in the suburbs, but she says she owes everything to what happened during that cold winter in rural Pennsylvania back in 2010. Holly grew up in a small, dying steel town in the Rust Belt. It was a place left behind by time, full of empty factories and aging folks. Her parents moved to Philadelphia for work when she was just a toddler, leaving her behind in the care of her Grandpa Joe and his older sister, Aunt Tilly. The three of them lived in an old, creaky 2-story wooden house that rattled every time the winter wind blew. Aunt Tilly never married. She dedicated her entire existence to two things: raising Holly and taking care of her younger brother Joe. Their bond was something deep and ancient. They weren't just siblings. They were partners in survival. Grandpa Joe was a retired mill worker, tough, silent, and stubborn. But in 2005, his health crashed. Diabetes, heart trouble, and severe arthritis left him partially paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair. As his body failed, his mind reverted. He became incredibly difficult, throwing tantrums like a giant toddler. He was picky, grumpy, and demanding. And the only person he listened to was Aunt Tilly. She bathed him, fed him, and scolded him gently. She was the only one who could handle him. By 2010, Holly had married Tom. They were young, broke, and struggling to find their path. Instead of moving away, Tom, a saint of a guy, agreed to move into the old farmhouse to help Holly care for the two elderly relatives. But caregiver burnout is real. The pressure of medical bills and the constant demands of a sick old man began to erode their marriage. Arguments became a daily soundtrack in that small house. The breaking point was a snowy night in November. Tom had a job offer in Philadelphia, but Holly refused to leave her grandfather. Their shouting match echoed through the house. From his bedroom, Grandpa Joe started banging his cane against the wall, groaning about the noise. That's when Aunt Tilly, frail as a bird, pushed her door open. She pulled Holly into her room. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed, holding Holly's hand, staring out at the falling snow. She said something that chilled Holly to the bone. "You two need to stop fighting. I'm old, Holly. I won't be here forever, but I'm worried. If I die, who handles Joe? You can't do it. He'll tear your marriage apart." She paused, then whispered with absolute conviction, "If I go, I think I'll have to take him with me. I can't leave him behind. It would be hell for him, and hell for you." Holly dismissed it as grim talk from a tired old woman. She didn't know it was a prophecy. The next morning, Aunt Tilly didn't get up to make breakfast. She stayed in bed saying she felt weak. She insisted Holly and Tom go to work. That afternoon, Holly rushed home. She found Grandpa Joe sitting in his wheelchair in the living room, pointing frantically at Tilly's door. "Go check on your aunt. She's been breathing funny all day and she won't answer me." Holly ran in. Aunt Tilly was fading fast. It seemed she was holding on to her last breath just to see Holly one more time. Holly lifted her up. Aunt Tilly opened her eyes, looked at Holly, and then looked past her toward the door where Joe was hovering. She wheezed, repeating her promise, "Take care of him, or I'm taking him with me." She let out one last heavy sigh and died right there in Holly's arms. After Aunt Tilly's funeral, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It became terrifyingly quiet. Grandpa Joe didn't cry. He didn't say a word. He went from a complaining, grumpy old man to a statue. He would sit in his wheelchair for hours, staring at nothing. The family doctor prescribed a heavy cocktail of meds to keep his heart and blood sugar stable after the shock. Holly was diligent. Every meal, she sorted the pills into little cups, placed them on his tray, and watched him. "Take your medicine, Grandpa. I have to go to work." He would nod slightly. A few weeks passed. Holly and Tom started noticing impossible things. They would come home from work to find Grandpa Joe, a man who could barely move his arms, let alone wheel himself, sitting in the living room, facing the curio cabinet where Aunt Tilly's photo and urn were kept. The display was always dusted. Fresh flowers in the vase were watered. Dead petals were thrown away in the kitchen trash. How? When Holly asked, he would just mumble, "She came back, she cleaned it." Grandpa Joe's health began to plummet rapidly. The doctor was baffled. His numbers were crashing as if he wasn't taking any medication at all. Holly swore she was giving it to him, until one day, Holly was deep cleaning Grandpa's room. She swept under the bed and her broom hit something metal. Clunk. She pulled it out. It was an old Royal Dansk blue cookie tin, the kind Aunt Tilly used to keep her sewing kit in. It was heavy. Holly popped the lid. She gasped. It wasn't sewing supplies. It was filled to the brim with pills, heart meds, blood thinners, insulin needles, weeks' worth of medication. Grandpa Joe had been pretending to take them, then hiding them in the tin and shoving it deep under the bed. Holly burst into tears, running out to him with the tin. "Grandpa, why? Why aren't you taking your medicine? Do you want to leave us?" Grandpa Joe, lying in bed, slowly turned his head. His eyes were cloudy, but his gaze was sharp and cold. He spoke, his voice flat. "She won't let me." "Who?" Holly demanded. "Tilly." He pointed a shaking finger at the empty air. "She says it's a waste of your money. She says the medicine keeps me alive too long, and I'm a burden. She says she's waiting. I'm not taking it so I can go with her." Holly and Tom looked at each other, goosebumps erupting on their arms. Aunt Tilly's dying promise was coming true. She'd come back to fetch him. From that day on, Grandpa Joe stopped eating. He refused water. He clamped his mouth shut. He lay there, waiting for death like he was waiting for a bus. By the fifth day, he was barely hanging on. Around 4 p.m., relatives came to say their goodbyes. The room smelled of sickness and impending death. Suddenly, Grandpa Joe, who hadn't moved in 3 days, sat up. He sat bolt upright, his eyes wide and bright with a strange energy. He waved Holly and Tom closer. When he opened his mouth to speak, Holly almost collapsed. It wasn't his voice. Grandpa Joe's voice was deep, gravelly, and harsh. But the voice coming out of his throat now was light, lilting, and gentle. It was Aunt Tilly's voice, the cadence, the way he called Tom son, the way he smoothed Holly's hair. It was all Tilly. "Listen to me, you two," Grandpa said in Tilly's manner. "It's best if Joe comes with me. You're young. You have a future. Stop fighting. Bury him and then move to Philadelphia. There's nothing for you here." He turned to Tom, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "You take care of my Holly. I'm entrusting her to you." Holly, shaking, held his thin hand. "Grandpa? Or "Is that you, Aunt Tilly?" Grandpa looked at her, and a sweet, gentle smile spread across his face. A smile Holly had never seen on him, but had seen 1,000 times on her aunt. He didn't answer. He just nodded once. He stayed like that, lucid and gentle, for nearly 2 hours, saying goodbye to everyone. Then, exactly at 6 p.m., he looked up at the ceiling, as if seeing someone waiting for him. He spoke his final words. "All right, sis, let's go." He lay back on the pillow, closed his eyes, and exhaled, and he was gone. The funeral was peaceful. Holly knew Aunt Tilly had kept her word. She hadn't come back to haunt them. She had come back to save her brother from suffering and to free the young couple from their burden. Following the advice of both of them, Holly and Tom sold the old house and moved to the city. Strangely, after that, their luck turned. Tom got a great job. Holly opened her own business. Their life took off. Holly believes that somewhere, Aunt Tilly and Grandpa Joe are back together, bickering and laughing, watching over her little family from the other side. The Blood-Stained Love Letter. This story comes from Lorelei. She is now a woman in her late 70s, living quietly in a Victorian home in the suburbs of Virginia. But in her eyes, the images of the summer of 1968 in Vietnam have never faded. It wasn't just a war memory. It was the beginning of a ghostly love affair that almost took her life. In 1968, Lorelei was 21 years old. She was a volunteer in the Army Nurse Corps, stationed at the 95th Evacuation Hospital near the Da Nang Air Base. It was right after the Tet Offensive. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic, old blood, and the suffocating tropical heat that no American ever got used to. The thumping of UH-1 Huey rotor blades overhead was the sound of death. Every time they landed, a stream of stretchers would follow. One night, during a monsoon rain, a unit of Marines who had been ambushed near the Laotian border was brought in. Among the soldiers covered in mud and blood, Lorelei attended to a young man named Thomas. His dog tags were caked in dried blood. He had a massive chest wound from shrapnel. Lorelei was the one trying to stabilize him. In his final delirium, Thomas didn't scream. With a trembling hand, callous from holding a rifle, he reached into his breast pocket and pulled something out. He pressed it into Lorelei's hand. His blue eyes locked onto hers, and he whispered one name, Lorraine. Then he died. His eyes remained open, looking right through Lorelei, staring at some distant place back home. When the doctors called the time of death, Lorelei stood aside. In her hand was the object the soldier had entrusted to her, a crumpled, blood-stained envelope, unstamped. Protocol dictated she hand it over to the commanding officer to be sent home with his personal effects. But the name, he whispered, Lorraine, it sounded so much like her own name, Lorelei. In a moment of weakness, or perhaps fate, Lorelei hid the letter in her apron pocket. That night, in her humid hooch, under the dim light of a lantern, she opened it. It was written in neat cursive, the words of a simple country boy, but deeply romantic. He was writing to his sweetheart in Pennsylvania. My dearest Lorraine, if you are reading this, it means I will never see the autumn leaves on the Blue Ridge Mountains again. But don't cry, for I will always be the wind in your hair. Lorelei wept. She cried for the cruelty of the war and for the words of love that she, an orphan with no one back home, had never received. She began to read the letter every night. She imagined Thomas was writing to her. She convinced herself that in his dying moment, he had seen her and called her name. And then, Thomas came. At first, it was in dreams. Amidst the nightmares of mortars and gunfire, Thomas would appear, clean in his dress uniform, smiling at her. But slowly, he bled into reality. During late-night shifts at the field hospital, Lorelei would feel a cold chill run down her spine, even in the sweltering heat. She would smell the distinct scent of Marlboro Reds, the cigarettes the GIs smoked, wafting around her, even when she was alone. She felt protected. She felt loved by a ghost. In 1970, Lorelei finished her tour and returned to the U.S. She brought the blood-stained letter with her like a talisman. She returned to reality and arranged engagement to Charles. Charles was a wealthy orthopedic surgeon in Richmond. Through connections in school, he had received a draft deferment. While Lorelei was wading through mud in Vietnam, Charles had been building a comfortable career at home. The wedding was lavish. Lorelei tried to forget her ghost soldier and be a good wife, but Thomas wouldn't let her. The wedding night was the beginning of hell. As Charles, a bit drunk on champagne, approached Lorelei in their luxury hotel suite, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The heater, which was humming, suddenly died. The room became freezing cold, not a winter cold, but the damp, rot-smelling cold of a tropical jungle. Lorelei looked into the vanity mirror. Reflected behind her wasn't the warm bedroom, but a shadowy figure standing in the corner. He wasn't clean like in her dreams. He was covered in mud and blood, his chest torn open by shrapnel, his eyes wide and burning with rage. When Charles touched her shoulder, Lorelei screamed. She didn't feel her husband's hand. She felt a cold, rough hand, slick with mud, squeezing her throat. A whisper filled her ear, not in English, but sounding like wind rushing through bamboo, carrying a message of jealousy. You promised. You kept my letter. You are mine. Lorelei shoved Charles away, cowering in the corner of the bed. Charles was confused, then angry, and stormed off to the guest room. It happened every night. Whenever Charles tried to be intimate, Ghost Thomas would intervene. Sometimes it was violent banging on the door at 3 a.m. Sometimes Lorelei would wake up with bruises in the shape of handprints on her thighs. Sometimes Charles would wake up to find his wife sitting at the vanity, brushing her hair, whispering to the empty air in the voice of a love-struck girl. Charles thought she was insane or suffering from shell shock, PTSD. He sent her to psychiatrists, forced her to take sedatives, but the pills only made her sleep deeper, and in that sleep, Thomas possessed her more fully. She wasted away, becoming a hollow shell. Finally, after 6 months, Charles filed for divorce. He couldn't live with a wife who was cold as a corpse. He threw her out. Lorelei moved into a rundown apartment, desperate and alone. She took out the bloody letter, planning to tear it up and then kill herself. She thought death was the only way to escape him, or perhaps to be with him forever. That night, she prepared a bottle of sleeping pills. She lay down, waiting for Thomas to come for her. And he did. But this time, in the dream, he wasn't angry. He knelt beside her bed, his face filled with infinite sadness. He was no longer the vengeful spirit, but the 20-year-old boy who died too soon. He said, "Don't die, Lorelei. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. You aren't her. Please, take me home. My home is in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Please, return me to my mother." Lorelei woke up, knocking the pills to the floor. She realized her mistake. She had tethered his spirit to her through her own selfishness by keeping the letter, his only link to the living world. He haunted her because he thought she was his love, and because she held his ticket home. The next morning, Lorelei emptied her savings, gassed up her old car, and drove north. She followed the return address faintly visible on the envelope. The trip took 2 days. She arrived in a quiet rural town in Pennsylvania, surrounded by endless cornfields. She found the house, a white farmhouse, old but well kept. An elderly woman, stooped with age, opened the door. It was Thomas's mother. When Lorelei, shaking, handed her the yellowed letter stained with dried blood, the old woman collapsed onto the porch. She hugged the letter, kissing it as if it were her dead son. She invited Lorelei inside. On the mantelpiece was a photo of Thomas, smiling in his Marine uniform. And there, Lorelei learned the heartbreaking truth. She asked about the girl named Lorraine in the letter. The mother sighed, pointing out the window to a large, fancy house on the hill. Lorraine. She married someone else just 3 months after Tom shipped out. She didn't wait for him. She married a wealthy contractor. Tom died, never knowing he had been betrayed. Lorelei shivered. Thomas's spirit, lonely and in pain in a foreign land, saw Lorelei, someone with a similar name, holding his letter with such love, and latched onto her, thinking she was his faithful sweetheart. His jealousy toward Charles was the jealousy of a soldier who had been robbed of everything, his life and his love. That afternoon, Lorelei went with Thomas's mother to the local cemetery. His grave was under an old oak tree. Lorelei took out her lighter. She lit the corner of the letter right in front of the headstone. As the flames consumed the paper, she whispered, "Thomas, I am not Lorraine. I am Lorelei. I loved you through these words, but we belong to different worlds. She didn't deserve you. Please, let go. You are home now." The ashes of the letter floated up, swirling in the air even though there was no wind, and then vanished into the blue sky. A massive weight lifted off Lorelei's chest. The cold that had clung to her for 2 years suddenly vanished, replaced by the warm autumn sun of Pennsylvania. Lorelei stayed in town for a few days, then returned to Virginia to start over. The nightmares stopped. 3 years later, at a veterans gathering she attended to offer medical support, she met a man. He had lost a leg at Khe Sanh. He walked with a limp, but he had the kindest smile. He understood the pain of war, unlike her cold, wealthy ex-husband. They fell in love and got married. They lived a quiet, happy life. And the strangest coincidence, the thing that makes Lorelei believe in fate, her second husband's name was also Thomas. Lorelei believes that the young ghost soldier, once freed, chose this comrade to pay back the happiness he had accidentally stolen from her during her youth. Dead weight. This story comes from Mark, and it happened in the summer of 2018. It was their senior trip, one last hurrah before college. Mark and his 5 best friends, a group of guys who had just graduated high school in Boston, decided to take a road trip to Salem, Massachusetts. They picked Salem not just for the witch history, but because it was near the ocean and it was cheap. Being broke students, their main priority was saving money. They drove into Salem late in the afternoon. A drizzle had started to fall, making the historic town look even more gloomy. After getting sticker shock at the downtown hotels, they drove around the back streets near the old wharf until they found a rotting wooden sign. The Old Harbor Inn. It was a 6-story red brick building, colonial style but falling apart, wedged between 2 abandoned warehouses. The landlady, Mrs. Higgins, was a large woman with a stiff, frozen smile. When she heard they wanted a cheap room, she narrowed her eyes, then handed them a scratched-up key card. "Room 603, she said, her voice raspy. "Top floor, student discount. You boys are lucky the whole 6th floor is empty tonight. Make as much noise as you want." The guys excitedly hauled their bags into the elevator. It was tiny, smelling of grease and mildew, and it groaned, creak, clunk, as it slowly crawled up to the 6th floor. The doors opened. The hallway was long and dim, lined with dark red carpet that had faded with age. The yellow sconce lights flickered. The air up here was noticeably colder, a chill that settled right into their bones. They found room 603 at the end of the hall. Mark swiped the key card. Beep. Click. The green light flashed. Mark turned the handle and pushed. The door opened about 2 inches, and then hit something. It wasn't the deadbolt. It felt like it was blocked by something, soft but heavy on the other side. "What the hell?" Mark muttered. He shoved it with his shoulder. Thud. The door didn't budge. In fact, Mark felt a distinct pressure pushing back from the inside. "Door's stuck, guys," Mark said. The group laughed. "Mark, you need to hit the gym. Move over." Kyle, the biggest and rowdiest guy in the group, stepped up. He backed up a few feet, braced himself, and threw his entire body weight against the heavy oak door. 1, 2, 3, hit it! Bam! The door flew open under Kyle's force. But the moment the door swung in, all 6 boys heard a horrific sound coming from the pitch-black room. Thud. It was the heavy, wet sound of a body hitting the floorboards, hard, followed by the clatter of metal rolling across wood. Kyle stumbled into the room from his own momentum. He scrambled to his feet and looked up into the darkness. The lights weren't on yet. Only the dim hallway light spilled in. In those 3 seconds, Kyle froze. Lying sprawled on the floor, right where the door had been, was an old man. He was wearing an outdated, dusty suit. He lay face down, limbs twisted as if he had just been violently shoved over by Kyle's shoulder charge. Next to his hand, the silver-headed cane was rolling away. But the scariest part was his head. It slowly lifted up. He looked back at Kyle with eyes that were pure white, filled with rage. "Ah, there's someone in here. I knocked him over," Kyle screamed. Crab walking backward out into the hall, his face drained of color. The moment Kyle cleared the threshold, the door to room 603 slowly began to close. Not from a draft, not from a spring. It swung shut deliberately. Click. The deadbolt locked from the inside. The group stood paralyzed in the hallway, hearts pounding. "What? What did you see?" Mark stammered. "An old guy. I swear. I slammed the door and knocked him down. He's lying right there." Kyle was shaking, pointing at the closed door. Panicked, they ran downstairs and dragged Mrs. Higgins up. The landlady grumbled the whole way, bringing the master key. She pushed the door open. Click. It swung open effortlessly. Nothing blocked it. She flipped the light switch. The room was huge and empty. 3 double beds made with crisp white sheets. No old man, no cane, no sign of life. "You boys on drugs?" Mrs. Higgins snapped. "There's nobody here. This floor's been empty all week." She left, leaving the 6 boys standing there, confused. Even though they were spooked, they had already paid, and finding another room in Salem at night was impossible. They reasoned that Kyle must have been seeing things. They split up the beds. Mark, Kyle, and a friend named Sam took the bed closest to the window. Night fell. The room went dark. Around 1 a.m., everyone was asleep. Suddenly, a loud noise woke Mark. Thump. He sat up. Kyle was lying on the floor, groaning. "Who kicked me?" Kyle scrambled up, rubbing his hip. "That hurt." Sam, waking up next to him, looked confused. "You dreaming? Nobody touched you." Kyle grumbled and climbed back into bed. "Must have rolled off. Sorry." But the silence, it didn't last. 20 minutes later. Mark was drifting off when he felt the entire mattress shake violently. Wham! This time, Kyle was launched further, hitting his back against the dresser a few feet away. Kyle screamed, "It's not a dream! Someone kicked me! I swear! I was lying there and I felt a cold foot kick me right in the stomach!" He turned on all the lights. The room was in chaos. No one could sleep. Kyle sat huddled in a chair, too scared to get back in bed. Around 3 a.m., exhaustion took over. Kyle thought maybe it was over. He tiptoed back to the bed, lying on the very edge against the wall so he couldn't be pushed off. He closed his eyes for just a few minutes. Mark, who was still awake watching, saw something impossible. The empty mattress space right next to Kyle began to depress. It sank down deep, forming the shape of an invisible body lying down next to his friend. Mark tried to yell a warning, but his voice caught in his throat. He saw the invisible depression coil its legs back and then kick out. A massive invisible force slammed into Kyle's side. Boom! Kyle flew across the bed, smashing his head against the window pane. This time, Kyle didn't curse. He started crying. "I'm not staying here. I'm sleeping in the car. There's a ghost in here. He won't let me lie down." Kyle grabbed his heavy winter coat and his car keys. "I'm going to the car. You guys sleep." He ran out of the room like the devil was chasing him. Mark and Sam looked at each other. They were worried but exhausted. They figured Kyle was safe in the car. But 30 minutes passed. Mark called Kyle to check on him, straight to voicemail. 45 minutes. No text back. Mark got anxious. "I'm going down to check on him. He might be freaking out." Sam went with him. They took the elevator down to the lobby and went out to the parking lot. The car was there, locked, empty. Kyle wasn't inside. They asked the night clerk, who had taken over for Mrs. Higgins. She said, "Yeah, I saw that boy leave with his coat, but he turned right back around to the elevator. Said he forgot his wallet." Mark and Sam felt a chill. He went back up? He never came back to the room. They ran to the elevator and hit the button for the 6th floor. The elevator was slow. When it reached the 6th floor, the doors slowly slid open. Ding! The sight inside made Mark and Sam stumble back in horror. Inside the elevator was Kyle. But Kyle wasn't right. He was huddled in the back corner, pressed tight against the metal wall. He had his heavy winter coat zipped up to his chin, yet sweat was pouring down his face like rain. His eyes were rolled back, staring fixedly at the empty space right in front of him, near the elevator doors. His mouth was twisted, moving rapidly, muttering, but no sound was coming out. "Kyle!" Mark yelled, rushing in to drag him out. As soon as they pulled him into the hallway, Kyle collapsed, vomiting on the carpet. He started sobbing uncontrollably. Once they got him back into the room, with all lights on, Kyle told them the most terrifying story of his life. I went down to the lobby, but I realized I forgot my wallet. I went back to the elevator to come back up. When the doors opened on the 6th floor, I saw that old man, the same one I knocked over. He was standing right in front of the elevator doors, blocking my exit. He was staring at me, his face twisted in hate. I was so scared, I backed into the corner. He stepped inside. The elevator is small. He stood inches away from me. I could smell mold, dirt, and this freezing cold radiating off him. He didn't do anything. He just stood there, putting his face right up against mine, staring into my eyes. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Mark interrupted. "But we waited for you for an hour. Where were you?" Kyle shook his head, his voice breaking. "That's the worst part. I was trapped in there with him. The elevator kept going up and down. At one point, the doors opened on the 6th floor. I saw you guys. I saw you and Sam standing right there, pressing the call button. I screamed. I waved my hands. I was standing right in front of you, but you guys, you looked right through me. You looked into the elevator and you said to each other, 'Elevator's empty, maybe he took the stairs,' and then you let the doors close on me." Mark felt his blood run cold. He remembered pressing the button earlier, the doors opening to an empty car, and thinking it was a glitch. But it wasn't empty. Kyle had been standing there, screaming for help, blocked from their sight by the ghost of the old man. The ghost had used his own body to blind the living, keeping Kyle trapped in that metal box, tormenting him until he was bored. The next morning, the group fled the hotel. Before they left, they overheard the maid talking. "Room 603 again? Guests left early?" "Makes sense. The old man who used to live in that room years ago, he had a stroke. He fell and died right against the door. His body was so heavy it wedged the door shut. Paramedics had to break it down, but he was already gone. Ever since, that door always feels like someone's blocking it, and he loves riding the elevator." The Truck Without Batteries. This story comes from Kevin. It takes place in the summer of 2002 when he was about 12 years old. Kevin's family lived in a small, humid river town in Georgia. Their house backed right up to the water, with an old wooden dock stretching out into the murky brown river. The air there was always thick with the smell of mud and decaying leaves. Living right next door were Uncle Roy and Aunt Beth. They had a son named Tyler, who was 5. Kevin's little brother, Timmy, was 4. The two boys were inseparable, thick as thieves. Uncle Roy did well for himself, and for Tyler's 5th birthday, he bought him the ultimate gift, a massive imported RC dump truck. It was yellow, heavy-duty, ran on D-cell batteries, and made realistic engine sounds. Vroom, vroom, beep, beep. Back then, that toy was like gold. Since the backyard was mostly grass, the boys loved taking the truck out to the wooden dock. They would drive it dangerously close to the edge, using the truck bed to scoop up river water and dump it out. Kevin warned them a dozen times, "You guys are going to drop that thing in the river." But they never listened. One humid afternoon, tragedy struck. Kevin was inside watching TV when he heard Aunt Beth scream. He ran out to the dock. Tyler was gone. Timmy was standing there, frozen, staring at the swirling water, his face pale as a sheet. On the wet wood, the remote control lay abandoned. The truck and Tyler had vanished. Police and river rescue searched all night. A fisherman down the bank told the cops what he saw. The truck got stuck on the edge. Tyler reached out to grab it. Just then, a speedboat roared past. The wake hit the dock hard, knocking the boy and the toy into the current. The next morning, they found Tyler's body tangled in cypress roots a mile downriver. With the remote control, it was still on the dock. The truck, however, was gone. The funeral was heartbreaking. Aunt Beth was inconsolable. A week later, Kevin saw Timmy running over to Aunt Beth's house again. He followed him. He found Aunt Beth hugging Timmy, sobbing. She said, "Timmy, please come over whenever you want. Seeing you makes me feel like he's still here. You can play with his toys, just don't take them home, okay?" In the living room, on the mantelpiece, Aunt Beth had set up a memorial. Tyler's photo, candles, and the dump truck. It turned out, 2 days after the body was found, the truck had washed up on the bank. Someone found it and returned it. Even though it was waterlogged and broken, Aunt Beth put it right next to his picture like a sacred relic. A few days later, Timmy ran back home, looking terrified. He grabbed Kevin's arm. "Kevin, come quick! Tyler's truck, it woke up!" "What are you talking about? It's broken." "No, I was sitting there and it started the engine, vroom vroom, and the lights turned on and it drove itself right off the mantel." Kevin, skeptical, ran next door. Aunt Beth was out grocery shopping. The living room was cold and silent. The yellow dump truck was upside down in the middle of the floor. Its wheels were spinning. Whir, whir. Kevin shivered. He walked over and picked it up. It was ice cold, and it was wet. Water was dripping out of the battery compartment, pooling on the hardwood floor. It smelled like river mud. Kevin flipped it over to turn it off. He froze. The battery compartment was empty. No batteries, so why were the wheels spinning? The moment Kevin touched the switch, the wheels stopped. Terrified, he put it back on the mantel and dragged Timmy home. Over the next few weeks, Timmy changed. He stopped watching cartoons. He would just sit by the window, staring at the river. Every time he came back from playing at Aunt Beth's, he was damp. Not soaking wet like he'd been swimming, but covered in a cold, clammy moisture. His clothes felt sticky. When asked, he'd just say, "I was playing with Tyler. He likes to run around the house." One evening, Kevin's mom yelled, "Timmy, did you wet your pants on the sofa?" Timmy was watching TV. Underneath him was a huge wet spot soaking into the cushions. Timmy turned, his face blank. It wasn't me. It was Tyler. He was sitting next to me. He's always wet. His mom scolded him, thinking it was trauma acting up. But Kevin touched the wet spot. It wasn't urine. It was freezing cold water mixed with sand and bits of green algae. The climax happened on a Sunday afternoon. Kevin was doing homework when he heard a familiar mechanical sound. Whir, whir, beep, beep. The sound of the toy truck's horn. It was coming from the dock. Kevin looked out the window. Timmy was standing at the edge of the dock. He had his back to the house. His hands were held out in front of him, thumbs moving as if he were holding an invisible remote control. On the wooden planks, the dump truck, which should have been on Aunt Beth's mantel, was driving frantically back and forth. It would race toward the water, skid to a stop, reverse, and race forward again. It was moving without a remote. Kevin ran outside. "Timmy, what are you doing? Did you steal the truck?" Timmy slowly turned his head. It wasn't his brother's eyes. The pupils were dilated, black holes staring right through Kevin. Timmy's skin was pale, his lips blue. Water was dripping from Timmy's hair, running down his face and soaking his shirt, even though it was a dry, sunny day. He looked like he had just been pulled out of the river. Timmy opened his mouth. A voice came out, rough, gurgling, like someone trying to talk with water in their throat. "Kevin, Kevin, come down here. It's fun down here." Kevin felt his blood turn to ice. Timmy never called him Kevin. He always called him Bubba or Big Brother. Only Tyler called him Kevin. Suddenly, the truck revved and drove straight off the dock. Splash! Timmy giggled, a wet, rattling sound. The truck fell. Dive in and get it for me, Kevin. I can't go back down. The boat hit me too hard. Kevin didn't say a word. He grabbed his brother's freezing, slimy arm and dragged him back to the house. Once inside, Timmy shook violently, blinked, and woke up, remembering nothing. But that night, the nightmare truly began. Around 2 a.m., the family was woken by banging. Timmy was at the front door, frantically trying to unlock the deadbolt to get out. Kevin's dad grabbed him. "Timmy, where are you going?" Timmy screamed, fighting with the strength of a grown man. "Let me go! I want to go home! My house is over there! Mommy is waiting!" He pointed at Aunt Beth's house. "Mom, Dad, it's me, Tyler! Why won't you let me go home?" As he screamed, Timmy suddenly doubled over and vomited a massive amount of water. Murky, stinking river water poured out of the dry boy's mouth, flooding the hallway floor. Kevin's parents were terrified. They realized this was beyond them. They walked Timmy over to Aunt Beth's house in the middle of the night. As soon as Aunt Beth opened the door, Timmy threw himself into her arms, sobbing, "Mommy, I'm so cold." Aunt Beth, instead of being scared, hugged the boy tight. She wept. "Tyler, you came back to me?" That night, Timmy slept in Tyler's bed, hugging Tyler's blanket. Aunt Beth sat by the bed stroking his hair, whispering to her dead son. She knew it wasn't her son's body, but her grief made her accept the possession. She wanted to keep him. But Timmy began to fade. In just 3 days, he lost a dangerous amount of weight. His eyes were sunken, his skin gray. He refused to eat food. He only drank cup after cup of water. Kevin's parents knew if they didn't stop it, Timmy would die. They called a pastor. The pastor entered the room. Timmy, possessed by Tyler, curled into the corner of the bed, growling like a feral animal. The pastor turned to Aunt Beth. "You have to let go. Tyler died suddenly. He doesn't realize he's gone. He saw his friend, and he used him as a vessel to get back inside the house. But the living and the dead cannot share a body. If you keep him here, you are killing Timmy and trapping your own son's soul in limbo." Aunt Beth broke down, but she finally nodded. She sat on the bed, took Timmy's ice-cold hand, and choked out the words, "Tyler, baby, I love you, but you have to go. This isn't your house anymore. You're hurting Timmy. Go now, baby. Mommy will be okay." Hearing his mother's permission, the thing inside Timmy let out a long, heartbreaking wail. Then, Timmy's body went limp and collapsed onto the mattress. The next morning, they held a ceremony by the river. They fished the dump truck out one last time. They put it on a small raft made of flowers, along with Tyler's favorite clothes, and pushed it out into the current. Kevin watched the raft drift away into the mist. He swears, for a second, he saw the faint shimmering outline of a little boy sitting on the raft, waving goodbye, before fading into the fog. Timmy woke up with no memory of the week. Kevin's parents immediately sent Timmy to stay with their grandmother in another state for the summer, to break the connection completely. Years passed. Kevin still lives in that town. He says it's mostly peaceful now. But on hot, humid summer nights, when the wind blows off the river, you can still hear the faint whir of an electric motor and the giggle of a child echoing from under the dark pilings of the dock.